Hey everybody, this is Uncle Matt's D&D neighborhood, and we're doing top 5 DM tips. And so today we have Alyssa Faden, and she is the undisputed lord of the Roman Empire and plays a zillion different types of RPGs. So we're going to go through the top 5 DM tips. If you like this series, by the way, please subscribe to the channel so it gives you notifications. Alyssa, say hello to everybody.
Hey everyone, happy to be here, and Matt, thanks so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. So top 5 DM tips. I don't know what these are, by the way, for the audience, and so we're gonna start out with me flying blind. And so, Alyssa, what is your number 1 top DM tip?
All right. I want to give some context to this. You know, what I was going to do was I was kind of going to do this big picture, like this is how everything gets framed, drilling down into some details, almost going strategy to tactics. I guess that's my mini play coming out here, right? And then as I was writing down what I feel is important, it kind of dawned on me I should probably give a little bit of context. And in giving that context, it kind of changed which one I want to start with. The background for me is like people are probably going to be sitting out there saying, well, why do I care what a cartographer cares about GMing? And the truth is, I mean, I was actually GMing back in the early 80s, aging myself now on camera. And I was the first in my school to actually start Dungeons and Dragons. And back then to us, it's like, what is Dungeons and Dragons? What is role-playing games? It's such a new style of game. So I had to teach myself. You know, because no one's going to teach me. There was no YouTube. There was no internet. You're teaching yourself everything. Like, what is charisma? I don't know. What is this 3d6? What does that mean? And so I was the GM. I had to be the GM because no one else is going to be it. I had to coax all of these guys at school to come play. And it's on me. And this led to my epiphany for what I would consider to be the first GMing tip, to be honest with you. And I think it's a good mantra for life in general, but and most crafts. I think that you have to be capable of self-reflection, and you have to be capable of evolving. Reflection and evolving.
Speaking of reflection, that annoying line of light that you were talking about is hitting you again.
I'm going to sit over this side. Right.
Okay, self-reflection. What do you mean by self-reflection?
Well, what I mean by that is I think you have to be willing to look back on every single game you run and think about what went right, what went wrong, and be willing to adjust, evolve, grow, and get better. I mean, if you're listening to this today, then I think we all have an interest in being better GMs, right? I think we can be better players, we can be better writers, we can be better cartographers. And I think you have to sort of look at GMing, and I do now, by the way. I mean, I'm over 30 years now GMing. And even now, I mean, I GM last Saturday, and I find myself the following Sunday asking myself, how did it go? What went right? What went wrong? Did I screw up in some way? Is there something I could have done a little bit better? So I do that all of the time, and I think it makes me continually better and better and better. I think I'm willing to hone my skills, look at what isn't going right, and look at other GMs, look at what they're doing really, really well, and absorb from that. So I think if you're gonna be a great GM, I think you have to be willing to be allowed to be molded over time and your games. I mean, how many times have you had a TPK that really shouldn't have been a TPK, and you kick yourself afterwards because it's like, I could have handled that better, I could have done better. Or you have a disruptive player, you know, at the table. And I know that guests have spoken about these different subjects before in isolation, but really it's all part of it. It's like something went wrong at the table or went right, and it's recognizing that and being willing to do something about it. That's what I think is my number 1.
And that's a universal characteristic of everybody who's been on the show. If they can come up with 5 tips.
Right. No, totally right. Exactly. I mean, I could literally go back into just like, you know, games that I've run in January and say, I would have done this a little bit differently. And I think that's key. I think you've got to be able to do that. And my other tips later on kind of hook into this in a way, because they're things that I've learned through error, through trial and error. I think there's a level of that. You know, there's so many things that I could sort of say that I've done wrong over the years, and they stick with me, man. I mean, I'm talking about my first TPK was a party getting wiped out by I think it was a bunch of vampires, like 13 vampires I threw at them. And they're all named vampires, and I thought they were boss, and they looked really badass, and they're statted out the ass, and they were great. Well, yeah, they were too good for the party, and I massacred the party. It was a whitewash. And to this day, that was like 30 years ago, and to this day, that sticks with me. It's like, shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have done that. I mean, if the whole point is to wipe out your party, great, I won. But it wasn't. That wasn't the point of the game. So live and learn from that. And I'll tell you what, I did it again about 5 years ago. I had a TPK. And I see that as a failure of my own. So it's like I'm continually criticizing myself, if you like, and trying to be a better GM from that.
Well,
I'm willing
of course,
to be.
There are times when a TPK is entirely what's called for because of the way the players act, though, right?
Yeah, but yes, and we'll start, I think, touching upon some of these a little bit later on,
Okay.
you know, for sure. And yeah, I mean, you could sort of say that, but then even then, I think I would walk away afterwards and sort of say, how could I have handled that differently? How could have that turned out differently? So I don't know. I think number one is reflect upon your games and try to run continually better ones. Never sit on your laurels and saying, I'm a great GM. Never do that. It's like, you know, I work in the programming world, and it's a little bit like saying, I'm the best programmer. I'm never going to get better. And any programmer would tell you, no, you can always get better. You can always learn better techniques. And I think GMing is exactly the same.
How much of DMing do you think is just native talent, and how much of it do you think is learned?
That's a great question. I do think that there's some native talent. I do. And I think we'll touch upon this in some of my later tips here. But I mean, a certain part of it has got to be personality, right? A willingness to stand up in front of other people, a willingness to sort of conjure a story and tell it, a willingness to herd people. There has to be a certain capability and a certain willingness and a certain excitement at doing these things. But at the same time, I think it can be learned. I think it can be. I think it's just like anything else. It can be just a little harder. It's not maybe as native to you, you know. But I've got to be honest with you, and you may not believe this. I was a wallflower at school, okay? I'm Carrie.
Don't believe it. Don't believe it for a second.
I'm Carrie without the superpowers, man. I mean, I'm the geek. I'm the nerd back when geeks and nerds weren't cool. I've got long, black, greasy hair. You know, I've got spots. I'm just like, I just don't want to talk to anyone. No one wants to talk to me. And I don't want to stand up at the head of a table. But it was good for me. I've got to be honest with you. I actually learned so much just about interacting with people and life and doing speeches. If you'd said to 14-year-old Natalia, hey, will you do a speech in front of the class? I'd be like, I don't know. But then ask 20-year-old Natalia, I'd be like, hell yeah, let's do this. Because I've been doing it every Saturday at that point in front of like a table of 8 or 10 guys, some of which were jocks. And shh, don't tell the other jocks that I played Dungeons and Dragons on the weekend. Right. I mean, it was brilliant. I became such a better person from it. So I think it can be learned.
Let me ask one more question about how to do self-reflection. I often come out of a game session not sure whether I did a great job, not sure what the quality of the game session is. And I think that's because my head is so into running the game that I don't really get a replay reel all that terribly well. Do you have the same thing, or do you have any tips for how to evaluate how you did?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I never know right after a game because you're tired, right? You've been on it for 4 to 8 hours, maybe longer, and you're tired, and maybe you're exuberant, maybe you're not, but you're not thinking critically. For me, it sort of kind of comes the following day, and I found that 3 things helped me. One is my husband's in the group, so it's easy for me to sort of say the following day over breakfast, how did the game go? And you know, Jack is the type, he will be honest with me, and he'll sort of say, well, I think this went well, I think this could have gone better. So I think being able to reach out to a player who will like be honest with you is one way of doing it. I've even before now reached out to the players, you know, just I like to sort of touch base with the players between games, just, you know, partly to keep the interest there. But also just to remind them, hey, there's a game going on, and just keep your headspace in there, keep sowing the little seeds. But I'll outright say sometimes, I hope everyone's enjoying it. How do you think the sessions are going so far? And this will touch upon something that I'm going to sort of hit on right near the end. But, you know, if you've got the right group, people will tell you. People will, you know, and even sometimes the silence can be deafening, right? But people will tell you if they're happy or not. And then lastly, on that point, I think the day after, 2 days after, you can sit there and think just through the game, through the encounters. Did you deliver certain encounters the way that you thought that you were? Was it still good? Did the encounters go well? Did players seem to be entertained? Was anyone sitting there just staring at their phone all day? You know, were there any tells like that? Did everyone seem to be having fun with it? Did we even play a little bit long because they didn't want to pack up? And so I think through those different mediums, by digitally asking the players, asking an intimate player, or outright just asking yourself, yeah, 72 hours later, I think you can start to sort of see if it was a good game or not.
So one of the things I take from that too, actually, I'm not taking it from what you're saying. I'm looking back at groups I've played with, is that the longer you've played with the group, the more you're going to know their tells, the more likely they are to be willing to say. Because when you first start out with a group of people, it's like you say, about the only tell you can get is that if you blew it, the silence can be deafening, to quote your description. But that's about all you're going to get. You're not going to get very many meaningful tips, because, you know, people love you as a DM long before they're entirely comfortable with you as a person. And so they're very polite, and polite to an extent that is not going to help you with the adventure.
That's true, and I think that's fair. And you know, you reminded me that there's a. You're correct. Obviously, the longer you know people, the more that they're likely to be honest with you. The easier it is for you to be able to sort of pick up on their tells. But you can also pick up on, like, even when you're a player, right? When you're a player and maybe you alternate out the GMs, and this has happened. This has been factual for me. And there's a player sitting at the table looking at sports scores or Facebook on his phone. As a fellow player, I'm thinking, well, he's not so freaking mentally engaged right now, you know. And as a player, I can think, GM's not holding his attention. Yeah. GM's not, hey, you know. And that, to me, I can learn from that. It's like, well, there's a tell. I can pick up on the tell, but also the GM's doing something wrong, keeping the excitement at the table. You know, I had a player once playing a computer game at the table. He literally had his laptop out, and I was a fellow player at the time, right? As a GM, that shit would not fly. Right. But I mean, what does that say? He's not there for the game. You know, he's bored. He's somewhere else mentally. And that, to me, is, yes, it's a failure with the player. It 100% is. Shows a lot of disrespect. But the GM was losing the table. The GM was losing the attention. And I think even that, and I wasn't GMing at the time, I learned something from that, you know. And like, God, I hope I don't ever run a game this boring, you know.
Do you remember what it was that made that GM's game boring? Unless it's one of your later tips.
I don't think it is, to be honest with you. I mean, it kind of indirectly sort of plays into the next one. So maybe we'll even sort of segue into it. Yeah, I do. I mean, it was, well, it kind of does start to touch upon it, but I mean, there was a lot wrong with the game from a point of view of GM to each player engagement, to the amount, just almost like one of the key things was like the game was like using a homebrew system of rules, but no one knew the rules. So there was a lot of just like the GM and one player, like just sort of talking to each other about how something should work. And that just shouldn't have been, that's not a game right there, right? We're doing rule development. So where are your players' heads going to go at that point? Not there.
And we've got a really great question from the chat room, and this is probably not going to be one of your tips, although they may come in which case let's come back to it. But Bungee Wires is asking, if you are starting to lose the table, what are the strategies that you can use to regain the attention of the players? Because that may be a different set of strategies and skills entirely than getting them engaged in the first place, or it might be the same.
I think it's a solid question, and yeah, it tips into a little bit of what I'll talk about later, but I can talk about this in a completely different way. It's a brilliant question because it depends, right? I mean, you could be losing your table for a host of reasons, and let's start with a nice one. You're losing everyone because you've been playing for 12 hours and everyone's tired, right? I have actually fallen asleep at a gaming table before now, simply because we were playing so long.
Guilty.
Right? And the GM was doing great, no problem to the GM. I was dog tired, man. And so if you, I mean, I think as a GM, if you see that your table is not paying attention, you've got someone on a phone, someone playing a game, God forbid, or someone's fallen asleep or is drunk, I've done that too. Yeah. I think the first thing you've got to do, you've got to triage this thing as a GM, right? Have we been playing a long time? Has the game got a lot of energy to it, but people are still kind of drifting? Well, okay, right then and there, you can say, hey guys, I can see that everyone's getting a little bit tired here. Maybe it's time to call it. And if the players are genuinely getting tired that way, everyone go, yeah, okay, that's good. And just call it, just stop it. Just get to a point where you can stop and move on, and then everyone will likely be appreciative. Nothing wrong with that. If it's that middle zone, and we've got a couple of players in our group that will do this, so I deal with this. It's like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing on your phone? Call them out. It's like, what are you doing? What is the game not interesting you? And with the right group, it's like, oh, sorry, just checking the scores. Put his little phone away.
Right.
And I'm hoping that my friend actually watches this and he'll recognize himself in it, because he does it. And we call him on it. And it's got to a point where, our group is a good, cohesive group. And even Jack will sit there, all the players will sit there and go, what are you doing? No, stop that. So that's the middle zone. That's the harmless, a player just letting himself drift. And I think in that sort of moment, you can ask yourself as a GM, am I ensuring that I'm keeping everyone involved? Is there something I can do just to keep the energy up, keep the pace moving around, keep people pulled in? And you can ask yourself that honest question at that time. And if you're doing okay and everything's fine, and it's just a player harmlessly off to the one side, give him a little slap. Everything will be good.
Now, one of the things, though, that I run into when I see even one player's attention starting to flag, it is usually because my mental acumen is not there. I'm not being, I'm not being creative enough, or I'm just flubbing it on keeping everybody involved. I mean, there's a point where you suddenly feel like you're drowning when you're just not having a good, you're not having a good day. Everybody has, the occasional bad day. I didn't even know that you could pay money to do a chat. Bruce, you don't have to pay money to put a question in the chat. I don't know if there's a way to get that $5 back, but we do have a question from Bruce, and he's paying for an answer, so we both need to.
All right, I'm going to give him a good answer.
Right,
here.
Yeah.
All right.
So his question is, how long do you run without a break? How long are your sessions? And do you run with coffee in abundance? Bruce, I'm just going to say coffee in abundance, I think, is probably going to be true for both of us. And then
coffee never hurts. I mean, God, man. I mean, all right. So you ask Alyssa from when she was 20, I would play every week. We would do 24-hour sessions. My energy level was ridiculous, and I don't know how I did it. Nowadays, I'm a little older, a little wiser. I like to have a glass of wine with my game and a few beers. So I personally run from around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and go through to around 10. If the game has got a huge amount of energy still at the table around 10 o'clock, and the pace is good and we're in the middle of something, we might go through to about 11, sometimes midnight. I mean, what is that, about 8-9 hours? They're about sometimes 10 or 11. That's rarer. 8 hours seems to be our mark for people's general energy levels, my energy levels. Occasionally, we can go a little bit longer. I personally don't like games shorter than 4 hours because it seems like you need an hour or two just to get going, right? Get warmed up.
You do. That's one of the downsides on the online show that I do, is that we've got part of it is just because of scheduling, that we've got, some people who can start at a particular time, some people can end at a particular time, and it really works out to be about a 2.5 hour window. And I got an interesting question. I need to get James Spahn back on here, because one comment that he made when he was in one of those games was that he thinks 2 hours is the optimal window, which I agree. I think that's too short for a real.
I do too. And I mean, I think 2 hours for your context, yes. I mean, I don't think you're going to get your guys together for an 8-hour window. You're just not. At a convention game, I think 4 hours is optimal. At a tabletop game with friends, I personally like the 6 to 8 hours. I'd like to play for the day. That's what I want to do. I did a 24-hour one about a decade or so ago, and it destroyed me. I just don't have it anymore.
Yeah, I used to play. We've got the youth age thing going in two directions too, because it's not just energy. It's that when we were in middle school or younger, you simply have more time than you do, when you're an adult and you've got a job and so on. But yeah, we used to, in middle school, we used to play, for the 24-hour sessions. And so that's when you had people literally fall over asleep before you stopped. And sometimes you wouldn't even stop. It was like, okay, John's down, but Sean's still up. So we're going to keep going. And, if John's character dies, that's, shouldn't have fallen asleep, pal. But yeah, and then in college, we dropped down. I think I played in college. We only played during the summer, and I think there we played about the 8-hour session. And then after that, it dropped to about 6 hours. When I was working, and then now now I only really game online and at conventions. So there, it's the 4-hour convention and the 2-hour online session, except for the one convention where I did the 14-hour marathon game,
which was admirable. That is admirable. I mean, to answer Bruce's question, I mean, it's almost like it really depends, right, Matt? I mean, it depends upon who you're with, what the setup is. If I was playing during the week on an evening, I wouldn't be playing for 8 hours. I'd probably be lucky to get 4 in, and it would probably be like 2 to 4 in an evening, because people have got to go to work the following day. So I think it depends on your group and what time you're playing.
And we got another question that this one might be something that we put off, but Bruce again mentions that he needs an hour to 3 hours to get the players oriented to actually want to play. And so that leads to another question of how to fire the game up fast.
Yeah, that's a good one, man.
Which is a procedural question. Yeah. So it's not really going to fit into the top DM tips, but I have definitely had tabletop, and it seems to be the tabletop sessions, not the conventions or the online games, but when people show up and they're coming off of work, and here are their friends, and hey, how is your kid doing after having the cold last week, and just completely normal conversations that people are going to have. How do you roll that into, because with 8 players you're going to have this, how do you get people rolled up into the excitement level of the game?
It's another really good solid question. Me personally, I'm gonna answer this as a player and as a GM, because as a player I tend to see it more than as a GM, because as a GM, what I tend to do is I realize that as people are going to get together, there's going to be a level of that. We all get settled with the dice trays are coming out. The dice, there's a little bit of bullshit and the shit going around. And that's cool. Just let it go. Let people sort of flow. But then I honestly, I jump into the game. I mean, I will be, all right, so where we left. In fact, this last Saturday just gone, I was like, it's January 17th and there's a snow coming down.
And so you just start gaming.
I just started. And
because there's 2 ways to do that. One way of quieting down an audience is to whisper. And the other way of quieting them down is the voice that projects.
I went in. I went straight into it, and it was easier because it was called a Cthulhu game. But I think you could do it with almost anything, you know. So where we left this, I don't even think I would say where we left this. You know, you were staring at the door with hobgoblins on the other side. I think I would say the door is almost kicked off its hinges. All of you are suddenly snapped to attention, and suddenly it's like, "Oh shit, are we in combat? Am
Right.
I rolling initiative? Let's get their attention." That's how I tend to do it. And now I've seen it as a player though, where GMs, let's say, less willing to do that, will just hope for things to pan out, and it doesn't. It just won't. Players will keep on doing it
because there are special social rules for DMing and playing a game. And so if you don't recognize and take advantage of those special social rules, like one of which can be you can project your voice a lot louder than you normally would in any sort of conversation with people, because I think
this does start to tip into my next hint.
Okay, all right.
If I take this too much further, but it does.
All right. Well, we will back off from that one. We are further into your first DM tip than we normally are at the 25-minute mark. So let's go on to your next one.
All right. Well, it's a good segue then, right? Because this is my next one, and it's going to sound ominous, but it's true. You know, a lot of people say you're the storyteller, and I'm going to pull that back a little bit, because yes, you are, but that's one facet. You are also a director. You are the stage manager. That is your job. I call it, you're the director. Mm-hmm. That is your job. And I see it as a job, as a GM. You are here to facilitate fun, engagement, happiness, sometimes horror, revulsion, emotions from your players. You are a storyteller. That is one tool that you have to get it. But there is so much more. You have responsibility at the table. You have responsibility to make sure the players are enjoying themselves. You will enjoy yourself when the story is good and the game is good, the energy levels are up, and the players are having fun, and the story will take on a life of its own, and you will have fun. The job is not for you to have fun. The job is for you to provide fun. That's how I see GMing. And that has a whole host of things that you have to get right. And I was actually going to start with this one because it's like the big picture thing. But I wanted to sort of give that context first of let's be willing to learn. Now we sort of take a step backwards here. You have a job to do, and your job is to be a good game master, referee, keeper, whatever you want to call it. I thought about this for a little bit, and I want to call you as a stage master. And the reason why I'm doing that is the stage is what you're creating, right? And you are going to put a story on that stage, and the decoration that's on that stage is going to be down to you, and the sound effects and the lighting. That's all you. That's the storyteller director bit that kicks in. And it is all on you, not the players. Your job is to call up the players onto the stage to be part of this story. And you're going to call your NPCs onto the stage at certain times too. But you have to set that stage, make sure everyone is aware when they're meant to be on it or not, when they're on the stage and they need to be off it. That's just as much of the actual job of being a GM as anything else. And that's where you become the conductor, and the group become part of this stage performance. That's how I see GMing, big picture.
So that actually brings up something that Jennifer King had said earlier in the chat, which I put off until now because I wasn't entirely sure where to address it. But she says a lot is on the players and their efforts to engage their imagination, in my humble opinion. Now, that I think is a corresponding job for the stage manager, because if your actors are not engaged in a play, then you have, so there are two responsibilities. There's one as the game master, but then there is the other one of the players.
Yes, no, 100%, 100%. If it's the same Jennifer King, then she's actually one of my players.
Oh, okay.
if it's the same Jennifer
She
King.
says she's been at tables where multiple players were on their phones, so maybe there's some.
Actually,
she's
when
probably not talking about yours.
maybe. No. But seriously, yes, she is absolutely 100% right. But as a GM, let's recognize a part of the group is there is a social dynamic, and every player is going to have a slightly different personality. You're going to have the strong one in the group. You're going to have the boisterous, vocal one in the group. You're going to have a potential rules lawyer in the group. You're going to have good role players, and you're going to have not so great role players. It doesn't come that easy to them. Maybe they're a little bit shy. Maybe they need to come out of their shell. I argue that a good GM runs this like a stage performance and facilitates and provides a mechanism for players to get the best role-playing experience that they can have. It goes back to, you know, you've got a player using their phone. It's on you as a GM to stop that, because otherwise the player's not going to stop it of their own. That's part of your responsibility. If you've got a player that you've been ignoring for the last 8 hours, and Matt, you know that's true because I posted about it on Facebook once, then you know that's on you as a GM. That's not the player's fault. I think it starts with the GM every time. The GM has to give the canvas for the players to be able to enjoy themselves, and I think that starts with the GM, because the GM has the power to easily take that away accidentally in so many ways, allowing one player to have a run of the whole course, allow one player to be quoting rules out of their ass, you know, and just spoiling it for everyone else, allowing a player to bully other players. I've seen that at the table, and the GM isn't strong enough to either recognize it or do something about it, or simply not recognizing that one player is quiet and not really sort of saying much for the second hour. That's not really on the player at that point. GM has to facilitate. Hey, do you want to do something right now? What would you like to do? You know, and like be like literally running it like an orchestra. You know, that's what this whole thing is, and it's intimidating because there's a dozen different things to follow, and the larger the group, the harder it is.
It's the most terrifying top 5 DM tip that I've heard so far.
But it's true, right? If you want to be a better GM, recognize that your responsibility is to run this group, run this game, and do a lot of things that we're going to touch upon to enable your players. And I mean, I'm gonna gently touch upon something that I'm going to hit on later on, right? Part of this is about being a good storyteller. If you're not telling a story, and you know, there's different GMs have different ways of doing it. You know, we're not all great writers or able just to pull something out of our head at a whim. You know, maybe we've got a reading out of a manual and so on and so forth. That's okay. That doesn't matter. But you're still a storyteller, and you're meant to inspire something in your players. They want to be there. They can picture it in their mind's eye. They can picture their character in whatever scene that you've just painted. They want to interact with this scene. You've got to sow that seed of want in your players, a want to be engaged. You do that, the player will be engaged. I mean, all being well. And so, you know, hopefully Jennifer King would find that she hasn't got a desire to open up her phone and start looking at Facebook, because she's just had a story painted in front of her for her character that she wants to do something with. And hopefully she's got a good enough GM that enables her to do that, you know?
Yeah, she says that it's past games with other players. So you're off the hook unless she's lying. So there's actually a couple of different questions I have, and some of them are about what you mean by that tip, qua tip. One of the things that I take from that is that the GM has a job. Another thing that and again, that's where you're talking a little bit about some of the different social rules that apply, because there is no normal social situation where somebody is basically directing everything toward them and then broadcasting back out to an entire group, I guess, unless you're the CEO of a large corporation. So that's one of them, that the DM comes to it with a particular job. And another one is the theatrical component that you're talking about, which I think Brendan LaSalle, who we did an earlier one of these with, would definitely agree with. He really focused on the theater of the DM. So which direction are you taking it, or both, in terms of that tip? I mean,
I'm going to do both, but
okay.
I'm going to answer the second one, the theater aspect of it, in my third and fourth tips.
All right, so we'll put that one off for now.
The first aspect of it, the job aspect, the director aspect, you are the stage master aspect. This tip is focused around, let's just recognize that your job is to run a good, solid game and to entertain the players and to keep the game moving. And watch out for one player hogging all of the limelight, or you focus too long on one player. You spoke with Chris Christopherson not long ago, last week, and you were
Casey,
talking about Casey,
mm-hmm.
and you were talking about what do you do if one player wants to go off in one direction, and players are doing this. Well, you know what? The rules are exactly the same. You can have your players going 4 or 5 different directions. That's okay. As a GM, it's like, okay, recognize that everyone's just gone on different directions. I have a choice here. I can now just focus on Jennifer King here for 3 hours solid, in which case these guys are sitting there for 3 hours doing nothing. Or
Jennifer has just become the example as a
exactly,
result of her
exactly.
one
Now everyone knows
post
she's in my
there.
group. Or you can, and honestly, I was actually on the receiving end once in recent history. I was a player, and I literally didn't do anything for 8 hours. 8 hours. That's an extreme example, but there's a GM who ran a game for one player. The player had missed the last game, and he did a catch up, and that catch up lasted for 8 hours. That's a mistake. That's on the GM, that one. And I'll touch upon this actually in my last tip too later on, but that's on the GM. The GM handled that badly. What the GM should have done instead is recognize, I'm here to entertain everyone equally. I'm here to give equal opportunity for everyone here. Doesn't matter that this player missed last game. I want to do a catch up, but I'm going to do it in an equally distributed manner. All right. So James, what are you doing? And within, I swear, magic mark for me is about 20 minutes, half hour tops. 20 minutes, because things always take longer than you think. You give 10 minutes to this guy, that 10 minutes becomes 15. Move on to the next player. Just go round the table. Just go and be cognizant of the time. And it's like, okay, so stop you there. Jack, what are you doing while this is going on? Well, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Okay, great. On to the next one. And that's what I mean about being, a conductor. And this is an orchestra here. You have to realize that there's a tempo to the game, and the tempo has to be pretty even. It's okay occasionally to deviate, and maybe there's a small group that get a little bit more attention if the excitement level is there. If you see your players that aren't involved leaning forward and they're visually engaged and they're listening and they're laughing and they're joking, they're just as engaged, and that's okay. But don't rely on that. Golden rule of thumb: apply even attention to everyone and everything. And if you feel that that is getting pulled away from you because you have a disruptive player, you have a player who's quoting rules and pulling out books, or is sitting there on his phone, or is talking to other players, telling them the latest scores, anything that is interrupting that tempo, that's interrupting your stage. It's interrupting your play. That's where the responsibility is. And that's what my second tip is. You are responsible for doing something about it. And we have in my group a GM that is going to be coming up who is by nature a quieter guy. He's going to be GMing. And he needs to get control of that table and control that. If he sees it, he's got to do something about it. And that's what I would say. If you want to be a better GM, you have to have more control. And now you don't have to be an asshole about this, we're all humans. As a social event, you can be nice, but it goes back to my earlier point of, hey, what are you doing? Stop. And it's also okay, let's just stop there. What are you doing now? You can be really nice, but keep things flowing evenly.
We've got Bruce just mentioned that there's no like button to hit for the things that people say in the chat. they can like the video, but they can't like the other people who are chatting. Because Jennifer, you scored a gold star from Bruce.
Nice.
I think she's still clawing her way back because she's saying that you're phenomenal and she's privileged to be at your table. And so I think she's working her way out of that hole, plus possibly bucking for more experience points.
Jennifer comes from a slightly different group. Jennifer's been with us since the beginning of the year. She's our newest player. She's absolutely wonderful. But she comes from an environment, a very dear friend of mine who doesn't GM anymore, where it was a much larger group. I think it was like 8-10 people, evening games, compressed timeline, a lot of disruption going on. Players, I think, would have to vie for attention a little bit more because of the volume of players in a short amount of time. That's what Jennifer is coming from. So I'm hoping to show her something where you can enjoy the experience a little bit more.
Because there is the Alyssa Faden corollary of time that you have worked out over the course of DM tip number 2. And the Alyssa Faden time corollary is this: you have to be cognizant of time and use simultaneity of dealing with players.
Yep.
How's that?
I think that's beautiful, man. I think that you said it beautifully. Put a trademark thing on that, and let's set up the website. No, that's great. Totally.
Okay, so that is what I've got. Now, we do have a question about when you used to have 10 people, what system did you use? Did you run rules light systems like Swords and Wizardry, or were you playing one of the 3X or Pathfinder 1E, which I think you can probably answer that one pretty quickly, and I doubt that'll come into one of the other tips.
It won't. I mean, in all truth, I actually pride myself on the fact that I've been part of a lot of different rule systems, and I like that. Back in the big groups, it was things like RuneQuest. It was Dungeons and Dragons second edition.
Oh my God, you had a large group playing RuneQuest?
Ah, yeah, no, we did. And God's honest truth, when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons for the first time, like first edition days, blue box, red box stuff, I really didn't know this whole concept of parties and shit. So we used to run like 10 characters each, and like have these massive groups of like 50, 60, 70 dudes just like stonking a dungeon because nothing could stand in the way. I mean, we had that wrong, obviously. But when you're younger, I mean, things could be a little bit more sort of chaos factor and you could still be very entertained. Now I'd like to stick between 4 and 6. And that's my personal sweet spot. I don't mention this in my hints and tips, but I think knowing as a GM, in fact, it's kind of related in a way. Know as a GM how many people you're comfortable with having on your stage, right? For me, it's 4 and 6. More than 6, I'm not giving the attention to the players I think they deserve. So I personally don't do it. The big games that you and Bill run, I don't know how you do it, man. I mean, it's just...
Well, that is using a lighter system. I couldn't do that even using first edition AD&D. I mean, that's got to be original D&D or group size plummets that I can handle. Okay, so that was DM tip number 2. What's DM tip number 3?
All right, so this is kind of the theme now. I'm gonna sort of deep dive into this a little bit. And I think everyone is probably even going to recognize when I say this, because look at me, I'm animated. I've already turned myself up to an 11 here, and that is my 3rd tip: energy. You've got to have energy as a GM. You've got to love your own game. And I can't stress this enough. Tim Kask says you're there to have fun, and that's true. But no one's going to have fun if the GM isn't having fun. The players are going to...
That was my tip. That was my first tip.
Oh, well, there you go,
sorry,
right?
Go yeah.
You've got... It's the same thing. If you are quiet by nature, and James, I'm talking to you when you watch this video later. If you are quiet by nature, that won't do as a GM. If you are quiet as a player, that won't do as a GM. Crank it up. You don't have to be like loud and brash, but you have to be more than you normally would, because you've got 4-6 players looking at you, and you have to control the table, and you have to inspire them, and you have to excite them, and you're not going to do that if you're going, and the drow goes to the door. It's just not going to cut it. Look up, look at your players, have fun, visualize the scene, and just belt it out, you know, just Crank it up.
I think you just hit my number 2 DM tip, which is eye contact, but okay.
No, but it's again, I think that's a beautiful tip. It's right. And I mean, I take that for granted in a way, because I was taught a long time ago to have like this eye-to-eye contact when you're talking to people, when you're talking to the group. They'll be looking in your book. They'll be like all shriveled up and diminutive and like that. Realize if you're doing that. There was a GM that we had a short while ago, and in all truth, his background material was great. It was this post-apocalyptic game. And he did a lot of writing for it, and his NPCs were fantastic. The setting was fantastic, and he GM'd it like he was playing. He was literally, yeah. So Martha comes across, and there was no energy with that, Matt. You know, there was nothing, and it's like you've got to give some. If you exude energy, it filters out to your players, and they'll pick up on that, you know. And if you were bored of your own game, and he came across as bored of his own game, so I got bored of my game, of his game, you know. So that would be my my third tip: have energy, love your own game, turn it up to 11.
I just had the microphone on mute because my son was coming in and is putting groceries away, which I noticed Jack
just walked behind me exactly at the same time.
Making his way across the back of the screen with a bag of groceries too. So it's grocery time everywhere. But yeah, no, I think energy and eye contact are possibly my first and second. Well, having fun is my first one, and then eye contact is probably the second one.
You can ruin your game. You can be as prepared as you like. You can have all of the materials that you like. You can have the best handouts if it's Call of Cthulhu or any other game that you like. If you come across bored, your players are going to be bored. I guarantee it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. So, and I'm not going to ask how you maintain energy through a game, because I think we sort of covered that. So why don't we go on to what your DM tip number 4 is?
Yeah, so DM tip number 4 is breathe the breath of life, okay? Breathe life into your game. Breathe life into your characters. Breathe life into the scenes that the players are experiencing. And what I mean about this is, and to me, it almost comes easily, which sounds big-headed, and it's not intended to be that way, but I kind of learned a tip or a trick a while ago, is I just picture it. I just picture the scene, and I tell people what I'm seeing in my head, right? You know, if this is a funeral with snow coming down and muffled footsteps and a distant huddled black crowd of reporters, then I just start describing that, you know, and players are like sitting there, go, "Wow, you're such a good storyteller." It's like I'm just describing what I'm seeing in my head. Visualize it and give them that, right? But I want to take this one step further, because it goes beyond just setting a scene. It goes beyond describing a monster. It goes beyond describing a combat or the swing of a mace that wishes over your head. I mean, describe that. Describe, what is that? It drags at your hair. It was so close. Let the players feel what you're describing. But take a step backwards. One thing I don't see every GM do is it doesn't stop just because the game has stopped. Right. I always, what I do is I encourage my players in a campaign-like environment, even if it's a short game. Give me some kind of short character background and personality, and give me some kind of little plot hook, something. It can be an item, it can be a quirk, it can be a personality thing, whatever it is, something that happened in your past. Between games, I'm always looking for an opportunity to hook that character now into the game and the setting in some way that might have nothing to do with the campaign as a whole. Because if you make it personal to the player and his or her character, they're now more invested in this game. They're not just stats on a sheet anymore. It's like, what do you mean my mom has turned up? And it's like, just do something that makes this world live a little bit. I mean, I've come over the years, I've done countless things where you know, like with Shadowrun, for example, or Call of Cthulhu, I'll actually like write a newspaper in between sessions, and you give the newspaper to the characters the following session, and maybe they're even reading about themselves, or they're reading about the events that are going on in the world and things. The world is living and breathing and doing things. In a D&D game, I actually had other adventuring parties that they would come across. And
oh, that's one of my favorites.
it's like you're not
Sorry.
the only adventuring party out here, right? I had
this one I have to tell my story on this one because I was so proud of it. It wasn't just another adventuring party. It was my guys were it was an evil party, and the way that I was handling evil was simply that everybody else was so prissy. All of the good people were prissy. That was what sort of matched up to a good alignment was in this campaign. And so they didn't just have another adventuring party that was out there. They had a rival party that was called the Whitefire Company. Every time they were described, it was shoulders back and speaking like a Shakespearean actor at them, and just being absolutely unbearable people. So that's my one on the other adventuring parties.
That's cool. That's a good one, man. Where I'm going with this, because you know everyone could, yeah, okay, I can understand describing a scene, I can understand this, I can understand trying to, but if you like between sessions, look at trying to involve your players, the characters, into the setting, not your campaign necessarily, the setting, in a way that has something to do with their character and nothing to do with your game, it will make the world and the setting and everything that's going on that little bit more personable to them. That's one reason why I like my character, my players to actually do a little bit of a background, because it always gives me something where I can like sort of pull on it. I've had my players go off on, I don't want to say personal quest or something like that. But, you know, get involved with NPCs or factions or things that are going on in the world. It's got book all to do with the game, and that's okay, because the more they do that, the more their character comes alive, and the more they give a shit about their character, because it's not just stats and hack and slash. They're doing something. They're affecting the world around them outside of the dungeon.
And so that's the distinction that you were drawing earlier between getting them involved in the setting as opposed to getting into the campaign, is that the things with the setting has nothing to do with the arc of what the other characters are all doing together.
Right. I mean, they were there as a team, and that's cool, and they can have amazing fun as a team. But if you're running a broader game, look at what you can do on individual levels. And it doesn't have to be, you get gagged in an alleyway and you're dead. It's not, I'm not talking about that type of thing. I'm talking about your girlfriend comes in to the bar and she's actually got a black eye. And suddenly the player is like, what the hell is going on here? Well, it's got nothing to do with the game. Now he's got emotion going on. What the hell? And now the NPC is that little bit more alive. And I love to look for opportunities to do that, to breathe that little bit of life. And this is where I'm going to end this one. As a GM, let it go. Let it adapt and let it just breathe. Let your game breathe. There are certain games that have to be a little bit more railroady, whether it be the setting or the scenario or whatever. That's cool. If you're doing a one-off session one evening, a lot of what I'm saying right now is irrelevant. But this part is still true. Let the game go. Just let the players do their thing. Let the story do its thing. Because when everything starts to work, right, and the players start to come up with these crazy ideas, and it's like, holy shit, that could actually work. Let them, because the best stories will come out of this. The best plot twists will come out of this. Maybe as a GM, you end up sitting there going, oh, I didn't see that happening. And that's what you want. That's when your fun starts to come in as a GM, when the actual game itself actually starts to stand on its own 2 feet and it's just running. It's going. Then you've done a grand job to me.
I think that, so one way I've seen in several memes about D&D, the DMs lament that they have spent all of this time preparing a thing, and then the characters, and it's the ones that I take the most objection to, not in a really bad way, but just where I disagree with the most, is they say, but everyone actually wants to talk to, Skozar the Goblin, or whatever the goblin's name was in the meme, or here's my
I've seen that meme, yeah.
yeah. So, and or here's my detailed plot, and here's the cardboard NPC that everybody likes. I think that as you put it, the story takes on life, and it takes on life if you are the sort of person who tosses out extraneous detail all the time and isn't worried about having things turn sharply in one direction as a result of that extraneous detail.
Exactly. Flow with it. The world will feel more natural that way. And this, I'm going to touch upon this in my final bullet point here, but the world will flow more naturally. The players will feel more part of it because they feel like they do have that freedom of movement. I always like to think that you can be an invisible railroad. And sometimes that's necessary just to nudge the players, but add those extra details like you're saying. I always remember one of my extra details, it was like a tavern thing. And like it was one of Jack's characters actually. And Jack sort of said, "So who else is in the bar?" And I hadn't thought about it. It was literally like the meme. And I was like, well, there's a Thrycreen TM sitting in the corner eating jam. And Jack was immediately, oh, I could talk to him. It was exactly the meme. And I was like, all right. And I just rolled with it. And I've got this Thrycreen clicking and clacking. Well, the next minute, the two of them are adventuring buddies together. This faceless, just decoration to the bar is now adventuring with them. And it was beautiful. It worked out great. We ended up with a name and everything. And that never would have happened if I wanted to railroad it and control it and micromanage it to that degree. You have to let your game pulse and live and breathe. And I mean, yeah, if you've just sat down and done this mega, like 5-inch thick amount of writing and your players go, I don't want to do that, then this touches into my final part here.
Okay, well, before we
right,
get
and I'm
to your
not
final
going
part,
to, but there is a limit. Of course, there's a limit, right? But otherwise, get your arms around your own game here. Get your arms around your own world, but then let the game just flow within it.
I want to go back to one of the first points that you raised on breathing the breath of life into the campaign. You talked about visualizing, and I think that's a skill that requires a great deal of practice at visualizing, except for probably some people. But how do you practice that? And then I'll say how I practice it. Or do you? You might be one of the naturals at visualizing.
I wouldn't say I'm a natural. There are two things that I have done, and I think they've made me stronger, to then just sort of do it off the cuff. But I'm not as great as I wish I was. One is I used to write everything. I mean, I would actually write my scenarios like I'm going to publish them. I would write room descriptions. I'd write stat blocks. I'd write everything. Because I personally, when I write, my brain turns off and it just flows. The more I think about it, the more kludgy the writing is, the worse that it is. So one thing I would do would be to write. And, then when you read it back to yourself, you end up sort of rewriting some noodling some things. But it's easier, I think, to get your thoughts and your visualizations down on paper. The next stage would be, I would lie awake at night before I go to sleep, thinking about scenes I want to play out. And I would sometimes think about them for a solid week, this scene and how I want to describe it. Well, you've got the luxury then of an entire week ahead of the game, like to try and get the vernacular down and the visuals down of what you want to do. I do that even to this day with some scenes. And then I think the more you do that, me personally, the more I write down and the more I almost practice in my head during the week, the easier it is then if something needs to be done on the fly,
So one of the things is that during your prep, work on the visualization of it as well as just what the map looks like, or
key scenes. Yeah, key scenes. I mean, you don't have to sort of describing a 10-foot wide corridor that bends off to the right further down the road, but if you're thinking about, at the point where they're actually going to go into the temple and there's the vampire is there in front of the, the altar, Start to visualize that. Visualize that way ahead of the game. And yeah, what does it look like? What is this scene? What are the walls like here? What's the lighting like? What does he look like when he's on the other side? How high up is he? Are the steps going up to this thing? You know, is there a smell in the air? That's what I do. And I start to describe this in my own head. And I find I go to sleep thinking about this stuff. And the next night I'll think about it again and modify the scene slightly.
See, when you say that you go over it in your own head, I go one step forward because I embrace the first sign of madness. I actually say it. I'll walk around talking to myself.
You know, and if that works for you, I think that's fine. The true story is I tried Dragon Speak once, you know, so I could walk around, like just describing it and get it narrated down on paper. It wouldn't work for me. My brain, the minute I go down into an audible level, it's like I get a complete disconnect in my brain. For me, writing it or just thinking about it is what works.
Because they say that the best way of preparing for something is to do it in the medium, and so I figure I'm in pretty good shape talking, because actually a lot of times those words will come back again verbatim when I am describing something in the game, and I may have forgotten them in the interim, but then they suddenly come out again. So it's
I think we could probably summarize this one then by saying, you know, practice during the week, whether it be just mentally, audibly, or writing it down. Think about it ahead of time in a format that works for you, right? I think that would be fair to say, you know, whatever works for you.
And we've had another suggestion come up from the chat room, which is crafting, which would be painting on your side, clearly, since you're a brilliant painter, and putting, you know, stuff together out of plastic or plaster and stuff on my side, which is trying to actually evoke through some physical medium what it is that you're seeing in your head. And when you get the alternative possibilities, you may spin out into some of those alternative possibilities with the thing too. I would not say that that's my primary way of visualizing them. Mine would be talking to myself, I think.
I talk to myself, but I talk to myself mentally, you know.
Yeah,
you know, and I think, you know, one way to look at this is, if you are going to describe to an artist, talking about the artistic aspect, a character or a scene, what do you tell that person? What are they drawing? Because that's what you practice, because that's what you have to do with your players. And don't worry about what each individual person is actually getting, because I've come to realize that every single player around the table is probably visualizing something different.
Yes.
But if it has the tone that you're striking for, you're golden. If they can visualize something, you're golden. And that's all you got to do, is give them enough to inspire their imagination, and then they'll fill in the blanks themselves.
And one thing actually that, let me go back and clarify something I said about crafting, that what you were saying reminded me of, although it's not a direct thing from it. I do visualize the inside of the places that I am crafting, even if I can't get it right. And the frustration is not being able to get it right. Your comment about what do you tell the artist suddenly clicked off the fact that, yeah, I know that I'm not being a very good artist on this stuff, but what is my brain telling me about what I would like to be doing? And that's where you put yourself into that corridor. What do I see in a corridor? Oh shit, there's a grate down at the bottom of that, you know, wall. What's coming out of there?
Right.
You know, so there's that.
But I would also say, you know, on a final part of this sort of breath of life and descriptions and things like that, many years ago, I had a GM that would breathe the breath of life into tavern meals. And it's like, yes, he would describe tavern meals to the nth degree, like in a way I would never be able to do. And it was irrelevant. It was just irrelevant. I mean, it's nice to describe a feast, but do it quick, get it done, and move on. I don't think you have to hang on to individual little details of anything. Even a smell in a crypt. Get the smell, invoke it, get the players thinking about it, and move on to the next part of the description. Don't hang on one facet of one detail that then, I was talking earlier about, spreading your attention. Well, as a GM, I think you need to spread your attention across the broad facets of a dank, dark alleyway that you're looking at. What is the lighting? What is the actual ground like? What are the walls like? Is there a skittering of feet? What are the sounds like in here? Hit the high points. Let the players fill in the blanks themselves, because that's actually a good tool for you to use, and move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was you stole my thunder on that, because I was going to wrap that up nicely by saying we're bringing it back to where it is that we've said that the players are going to do their own visualization from what you give them, and you pulled the rug out from under me right at that point.
I'm a disruptive player. What can I say?
What's your 5th DM tip?
All right, 5th DM tip. Okay, so this actually has nothing to do with actually running of the game, but everything about running to do with the group. So this would be less relevant if you are, let's say, GMing a convention game. Okay, rules change in a convention game. I acknowledge that. But if you are running, let's say, with the same sort of group of friends or core group of friends for any period of time, let's recognize that, and this I'm calling discourse. Okay, adult discourse. Let's recognize that this is a social event, that we are all friends sitting around the table with good intention to have a great adventure together. And let's recognize that even if we're dealing with young adults, that there can be things that happen around the table, or a player sitting out for 8 hours, not doing anything, or a player that feels bullied by another player. Whatever it is, let's recognize that outside of the game, it's okay to say something, and inside the game, it's okay to say something. And I'm going to give an example to explain this one, because I actually didn't do this, and this is where I learned from it. I had a player once. It was a little bit like where you were talking to Casey, and you were talking about how do you handle, like, players attacking other players and things like that. Mm-hmm. I've been in part of that situation. We all have, to a degree, I'm sure. And I was in a situation where I was a rogue, and I'm sneaking ahead, and this is my opportunity to shine, and I'm rolling really well, and the room that we're in is just going to go so wrong unless I can nail this. And I'm nailing it, man. I'm crawling along the walls. I'm in complete darkness. As a player, I am having so much fun with this scene. And then 2 of the players were like, I'd light a torch, and hey, what you doing? What you doing? And it ruined the scene. Yeah. I'm on the other side, and the room is suddenly coming alive. My character's now in a lot of jeopardy. Me as a player, I'm angry, and I internalize that anger. And it actually ended up destroying the game, because I actually started to feel a lot of hate towards this. I really had a lot of animosity. One thing that I learned from that, and this goes back to my first point of always try to grow and look what went wrong, what went right. I learned it's okay to say, hold on a sec, OOC, do you really want to do that? If you do that, it's going to ruin everything that I've just done. It's probably going to this room is just going to turn to shit. And because I think players can get excited to agree. I don't think a lot of players are intending to, with a lot of malice. But they can fumble and make things wrong and like fuck about. And they're like, they're telling jokes, and I'm going to try to torch down there. And it's okay to hit the pause button as a player or GM. The GM is as much responsible for this. And we have a rule in our group of, OOC. Are you sure you want to do that? If you do, things are probably going to go wrong. But I want to give you an opportunity to take that back in all of the excitement that's going on. And we've found, actually, we haven't had to use it that much, since we actually all just sat around as a group and said, let's just have this as a rule. Let's just recognize that we're doing this occasionally, and we're actually pissing each other off when we do it. Let's just allow ourselves to go, hold on a sec. And that's the mature discourse that I'm talking about. It's okay to have that. I think it's fundamental. I think it's important as a group, not just as a GM. But the GM should facilitate that, should encourage that, in-game or out of game, just to keep things harmonious. What do I do if there is some kind of player kill about to go down, player versus player? unless there has been some mutual agreement that this is going on, if this is something where it's one player maybe about to make another player unhappy, I will pause. Are you sure? Are you sure you want to do that? So I try to keep, I don't want to call it the maturity level of the game up. I try to keep the impulse actions more thoughtful. If that makes sense. And it just gives someone a chance to go, no, you know what? No, I won't do it. And it's been a lifeline several times, and it stops people walking away or pissed off because their character's dead or that scene got ruined for them. So I would say facilitating good, mature discourse as a group of gamers together is my last tip.
And I think that the methods by which that's done are probably going to vary, because your group will actually say something like, okay, out of character, whereas mine, I usually allow a lot more back and forth table talk to go on, where it's sometimes unclear whether someone's actually doing what they're saying or whether they're suggesting what you should not do, because sometimes in my player group, they fully intend to do what they should not do. Skeeter. So in that one, although it would probably be the same motivation as really the same pretty close method to yours, where you hang on, is that really what you're going to do? Or even wait, let me see if I get this straight, because I'm not, I say that a lot.
Good way of doing it. That's a good way of doing it. Exactly. All you've done is it's almost like that little speed bump, right? And I allow my players to do it even if they're not in the same scene. Instead of as a GM me saying, whoa, you're not there. Shh, shh, shh. If one of the players is about to do the equivalent of, wait, you're doing what? Then I'll allow it. It's that speed bump. Maybe that's what I should have called this. Allow speed bumps. But yes, just I think recognize that it's okay if your intent as a group is to get together, create characters, and then mash each other into a bloodied pulp. That's okay. If everyone's having fun, nothing wrong with that. But if there is a dynamic going on at the table that is affecting the enjoyment of others, then it's not okay. Introduce the speed bump and allow yourself or the players to go, hold on a minute. Is this what you're doing? Or so my understanding is. And I have found that most times the player in question or a couple of players in question will go, oh, no, I probably don't. Can I take that back? And great. And then things stay harmonious.
Because there is another school of DMing, and I have not heard this advised to anyone in 20 years, I think, because I think that this concept is largely dead, except for one or two of the relatively old DMs from the from the old times, the before times. But the school of, if you say it, your character did it.
And I've done it, man. I've been one of those GMs, 100%, and I've been one of the GMs. You're not there, you're not there. And you said it, so you did it. I've done that. But that goes back to my first point of what works, what doesn't work, be willing to evolve, get better as a GM. And so I'm not that player anymore. It's okay to be that GM. It's okay to have that type of group if everyone's having fun with it. But that's the emphasis, right? To come back to one of Tim Kask's main things, have fun. I think it was his first one.
It was.
And that is important. But to go back to my point of apply it equally, everyone's got to have fun here. And recognize where that's not happening. Recognize where you have a little bit of an imbalance. And then it's okay. It's okay to say, hold on a sec, guys. Clearly, are we sure we want to have this like party fighting each other now? And I've been in group. I mean, I've run games where the parties ended up fighting and mashing each other to pulp. Everyone had a blast and it was all good. Nothing wrong with that. But I've also run the table where it's like, you said you were kicking down the door, so you're kicking down the door now. And all I've done is I've created that opportunity for disruption, and I've created that opportunity for the campaign to go awry. And I don't like running games like that anymore, personally.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I really think that one has died out as a piece of advice. It was very strong, back in the 80s. Really
It
up.
goes to like chess. Oh no, you touched it. You got to move it now. That's not
Yeah.
even a thing in chess, by the way. Just everyone says that it is. It's, oh, you touched it. You touch it. Well, how about we're just like all players are
No, it's
together
if you
to
take
try to
your
have
it's if you take your finger off it, then your move is done, right? Is
right.
that
Well,
not a rule?
it's the whole you touch this pawn, so now you must move that pawn. No, no, that's not a thing, right? I mean, you can touch all of the pieces on the board if you want. You don't have to move them. But yeah, when the minute you start to move and take your finger off, you're done with this thing.
Okay,
But you
I
know,
just had to do a quick detour into the rules of chess from RPG. So okay, we're
no,
back.
but I mean, let's stay with that though for a moment. It's like, are we playing chess in a competitive environment here, or are we a whole bunch of guys and girls sitting around having a beer, having fun? And I like having the latter, you know. And if I say, whoa, 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 so this is my understanding. Is this really what you want to do? It might have detrimental effects. And the player says, yes. Then sometimes if it's going to be really bad, I might give them a second out. But even then, I'll go, all right, it's on you now. But I
Right.
gave you your opportunity. You can't come at me now when this shit goes wrong.
Right. Okay. Any other points that you want to raise that came up out of those 5 that you didn't have in your notes ahead of time?
Well, I mean, we covered a lot of ground here, and
Yeah,
there were
we
some
did.
great questions too.
We've been on 15 minutes longer than the usual, roughly an hour.
I
So
am an attention seeker. What can I say? No, honestly, no. You were very, very gracious host. You allowed me to sort of wax lyrical on a few of these points longer than I think we would normally. You know, these are the ones that I tend to think that are the most important. At the end of the day, they do boil down to our objective is we're in a social environment. Let's all have fun together. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I just try to break that down into the core mechanics of what facilitates that fun. And I think if I was just to summarize it all, it's like, as a GM, recognize that you do have the control to either make it fun or enable activity at the table and an environment that isn't going to be fun. It's on you. And I think you've got the tools to actually run a real tight game, make sure everyone's having fun, keep it flowing between the players. And if you do that and you keep coming back to these mantras each and every time, and then at the end of a game, you ask yourself, did I do that? Did I manage to run things well? Did I keep the pace moving? Was I energetic? Were people happy with it? And you honestly ask yourself that question, you will just get better over time. You just will.
yep, I think you're absolutely right with that. All right, everybody in the chat room, thank you very much. We had some great questions coming from the chat room this time. Chris Reese, I'm going to ask somebody else your question about what are the shortcuts on storytelling if you're pressed, simply because we're running out of time here, and I think that's kind of a difficult question, because I think that there are not shortcuts so
I
much
think you
with
could do an episode
storytelling.
just on that, couldn't you?
Well, you either could, or you could say that there's no such thing as a shortcut on storytelling, because some of the ones that we've heard have been talk to the players between the games, and and Chris, that may have been what you were really thinking about, was moving forward um, the shortcuts that are involved, for example, in the issue of getting the characters involved in the setting, if not the campaign, which is definitely an aspect of storytelling. And so there, I think one of the tips that comes out of it was um, to do it in between the games as a shortcut on storytelling. Um, but in terms of the arc of the characters becoming powerful and famous and having the connections to the campaign, I think that's one of the things that you really want to focus on, and you're really weakening the game if you do take shortcuts on that. I mean, that's my view of it. Alyssa.
No, I think you raise a really good point. Um, You know, if you take shortcuts to like be that, then yeah, I don't like to take shortcuts. But I do, to your point, I think there is an opportunity to keep a story moving or aspects of a story moving via, let's say, email or between games, right? But it's situational. Um, I remember being part of, I was running a game actually once where one of the characters was having, it wasn't even intended, a romantic tryst with one of the NPCs. And he actually wrote to me in story format what his character was doing. So he wrote to me between games, hey, I want to do this and this and this. And I wrote back, well, she does this, this, and this. And before you know it, it was a full-on romance between the two of them. And we actually managed to do it. And it was a brilliant story. And we did all of that between 2 sessions. Mm-hmm. So you could say that was like a shortcut, but it wasn't the main game. And sometimes we might keep a game moving between sessions, but again, it has to be situational. Like if you wanted to sort of say, okay, via email, so you're talking to the barman, let's do it via email. What questions have you got? I think that would be a way of keeping the game moving between sessions. And you could then sort of sit down and you've spoke to the barman already. But I wouldn't do it for the main arc. I wouldn't do it for the dragon combat. I haven't been doing that at all, let's say my current Call of Cthulhu game, because I want Call of Cthulhu to be me handing out props, you interviewing people, my response and how I respond. And I think I would lose that if I did it via email. So I've actually stayed out.
Yeah, well, Call of Cthulhu operates very differently from D&D too.
Right, exactly.
We're doing a really good job of. We've spent a lot of time not answering Chris's question, like we said we weren't going to answer Chris's question. So Chris is reining us in at this point, and now he's asking, he's clarifying the question, which is he was looking for shortcuts on preparing stories, and I've got an answer to that, which is one of the things that I said earlier on in the show, which was that this, at least in my games, the story takes on life of its own from the extraneous detail. Mm-hmm. And so a real shortcut, I think, is if you give them some extra detail, they're going to run with it. They will create.
And let them run with it.
Right.
Because they will now create their own story. You want a shortcut, like, and don't have to do much to create a story, let your players do it. Because they will. And let them, right? Let them do it.
I think that's, yeah, I mean, that is, I think, probably the best shortcut there is for creating a story, really, is to let the players do the work.
And then GM it like you intended it that way to be all along.
Right.
You can be sitting there and go, oh, that's a good idea. Right. But yeah, just let them go.
And another example, too, is from earlier in the thing when you were saying that you have them write up, one fact about their character as well, is that's probably another shortcut. It doesn't really help with the story, but it helps you come up with a story.
And it can. We came up with I think it was like 12 questions about your character. Answer these 12 questions, but
I would never do that. I hate getting homework.
Well, but it was written a little bit like the old Ultima game. So it's like, you meet a beggar in the street and he's begging for coins. What does your character do? And you start putting yourself in character. If I'm playing an orc, it's like I walk past him, I steal his coins, and I won't leave. And it just gives you that little bit of a clue into the personality of the character. By the time you get to the end of those and you're handed in towards your GM, between sessions, the GM's got lots of fodder, not only for personality and things. Because one of our questions is like, if you were to do a major quest, what would it be? What is significant for you? And it just like, okay, that gives me some seeds to work off here.
Yeah. I wouldn't like it.
Well, when I run for you, you're getting homework.
All right, okay. I hate homework. Okay, so there we will go ahead and wrap it up, and I think we've covered all of the questions now that people had raised in the chat room. So thank you, chat room, and Alyssa, thank you very much for being on the show again.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
All righty. So whatever kind of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.